Thank you, Ambassador Pillai, for that very interesting insight. Next, may I invite Professor Rajendra Srivastava, Provost and Deputy President, Singapore Management University, to share his insights on the topic. Professor, please.
That was fascinating, Ambassador. Ambassador Pillai made some comments that he was going to leave all the thinking and strategies to Professor Narayan and myself. I would like the audience to know that he's amongst the three of us. He's the only one who's made money in India. So I'm going to focus more on the business side of it as opposed to policy issues. And Ambassador Pillai made the comment that the second venture he had in India, they decided to do a market analysis and make sure this time they and they knew what they were doing before they jumped into it. And that's really an issue. We all know that India is a big market. So I mean, we still have to understand it. But importantly, we also have to understand what's the value proposition that we are bringing to it. So I'm just going to run through many characteristics. We all know that India is a big market. We know that in many categories, such as consumer goods, the growth rate is very high. On the other hand, there are categories that, in my opinion, are done with in terms of opportunities. So the telecom story is over, as far as I'm concerned. There may be, I think there are very good opportunities in areas like education. There are good opportunities even in the airline business, because transportation is a mess in India. So whenever there's a mess, that means there's a problem to be solved. All right, so growth rates are high, which means it's attractive. The market is big, which means it's attractive. But the thing is, the models that we're going to be running out there are very different. Incomes are limited. Therefore, pricing has to take that into account. We're not going to get that in margins, and we have to make it up in volume. What that then means is that whatever value, whatever solution in a category that we're bringing in, it has to be replicable. You start in one area, but it has to be scalable. And then we all know the problems related with labor in India. It's the entry may be easier than exit is. And also, but at the same time, labor is relatively cheap. But it's not cheap when you take into account that it's unskilled. So if you're going to go in there, you have to skill it up, if you will, in order for that labor to become productive. And it doesn't mean that we don't need capital and technology. It means we still need the capital and technology to be able to get the scalability that is needed. So the technology and capital will provide the platform. Another thing that we all know but we seem to forget when we think of the large Indian market is that there is no one India. There are many states, and each state has its own tariff system. And so if you're going to do business in India, you have to adjust your pricing almost state by state. There's tariffs whenever you cross a state border, so it's actually no different than cross-border management in Southeast Asia, and you're still within one country. We also have different tariffs in terms of taxes, etc. By state, and that has to be taken into account. And then local governments have their own little ways of operating. So you can't operate the same way in West Bengal as you can in Bihar, which is the state next door. So what does it all add up to? It adds up to a lot of complexity. And if I were to put Singapore on one side of complexity, which is simplicity, India would be at the other extreme of complexity, and somewhere in the middle would be, let's say, the United States. And would you go into, let's say, a large market like the US, which is more homogeneous, this, that, and the other, if you didn't know much about it? Would you like to go into it yourself, or would you like to get a partner to help you with it? So if you're going to get a partner in the US, you better get a partner if you're going to India, somebody who knows what the differences are between the states, somebody who really understands the language barriers, the cultural issues, and so on and so forth. And then we have aspirations. Let's not forget that even though India is a poor country, I keep running into people with very little money who love brands. So there's aspirations out there, and even people who are not very well off are looking forward to owning something that they can be proud of. So let's not just think of going into the basics. So let me try to take you through one example of how one might have to do things and how that is related to the kind of comments that are just made. As I mentioned, that telecom is a past story. Ambassador Pillai mentioned that when you land in the airport in Mumbai, and if you're 25% unsure, by the time you hit the first red light, you are 80% unsure. So what happens, amongst the many issues that India faces, energy, water, sanitation, sustainability, etc., etc. So let me just pick up on the example from Ambassador Pillai. I come out at the airport, and I'm lucky enough that somebody has arranged for me to be picked up. So what happens as you exit it? You will have people holding pieces of paper, sometimes hotel placards, etc., etc. So you are hit with 100 people holding stuff for you. And it's very, very hard to figure out who's the person who's really picking you up. Simple solution to that is, if a cab driver is picking you up, and you know that person's phone number, rather than searching for him amongst 100 people, you just call that phone number, and they spot you. Once you've gotten the driver, next time you go, if it's the same driver, it's easier for him to spot you coming out of one line than for you to spot him with the 100 people standing there. So there's a company there called Meru Cabs. And they started with looking at what's going on in Singapore, with our cab system. And they took the model, all the GPS connections, the technology, etc., but they took the model into India. And the question is, how do you add value in the Indian context? Now, we in Singapore are very impatient. So when I call up for a cab, and they say, 5 to 7 minutes, I said, why can't they do it faster? And I'm happier when they say 3 to 5 minutes. Well, the issue in India is not 3 to 5 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes. It's a question, are they going to show up at all? And so what really helps is if you are working with a company and it's the same cab driver who's picking you up every time you're going there, the cost of labor is lower. So you can get the same car and the driver for the equivalent of about 40 Singapore dollars a day. And so there's no waiting involved. And on the other hand, if you just want to hire by the kilometer, etc., the price is very, very low. It's only about 30 to 40 cents per kilometer. But what I'm trying to impress is that it's the labor cost in India that is cheap, that allows you to have the car for the whole day, and therefore you don't get into the business of calling. So Meru Cabs, they thought they were going to follow the Singaporean model, but they were not sure it's going to work and how the value proposition would have to be re-engineered in India. So they started out with putting the toe in the water strategy. Let's see if it works someplace. And that someplace was Mumbai. And very quickly it worked out there because it's a major issue, transportation. Then the second expansion was into Delhi. From Delhi they went to either Hyderabad or Bangalore, and they're all over the place now. And they started with 30 cabs in Mumbai, and I think they are close, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but it's got to be close to 10,000 cabs now. So the scalability is there, but you have to figure out what model is, what the model will be in Mumbai and how that model has to be changed. So the model in Delhi isn't exactly the same model. They've made some local kind of adjustments. All right, so we've talked about labor, we've talked about what the value proposition is. We've talked about how the technology provides the scalability and also provides for enhanced productivity. of the cabs and the cab driver. The issue then now is, okay, where does capital come in? And the model that Meru Cabs has been following is they want the operator of the automobile to be the owner. And what Meru Cabs is doing is actually negotiating with the manufacturers on behalf of the multiple owners, so they can get a lower price. They provide the operator services in terms of maintenance. So they're taking certain headaches out, and they're empowering individuals to be able to own the asset. Now, in order to do that, somebody has to have capital. And we just heard that capital in India is very expensive. You can bring in foreign capital, but then you face the risk. The Indian rupee in the last year has gone down from about 45 rupees per US dollar to 60. So there's a big depreciation of your foreign assets. So your return rate has to be high enough in order to take into account some of these risks. And so either it's going to have to be a private equity investment from outside, or it's going to have to be an internal investment. So the capital is going to be needed in order for this thing to work. So we need both labor and capital, and then we need to look at the business model that's going to generate it. So I'm just going to lick my fingers because I don't know the exact numbers. But conservatively, let's say in the US, we could get about 8%, 8.5% net margin, net profitability per dollar of sales. Let's say in India the margins are going to be lower, and I get about 4%. Okay, just generating numbers. Because we are labor intensive and not capital intensive, the asset turnover, which is sales divided by assets, is going to be more like 6 or 7 to 1. So when I multiply the margin by this turnover, that gives me return on assets. So 4 multiplied by, let's say, 6 is 24% return on assets. If I leverage that 2 to 1 in terms of assets to equity, so it's now 24 multiplied by 2, which is 48% return on equity. I mean, I'm doing this, just licking my finger and doing this kind of analysis. Now, what we can bank on in India is lower margins, I agree. What we can bank on in India is relatively high over asset turnover, capital turnover. All right? And in terms of leverage, that's up to the arrangements that we can make, but we can typically get 2 to 1. So in my opinion, if we're doing things right in areas where there's demand, where we have actually done the analysis, gone through this whole issue of demand versus supply, including who the competitors are going to be, then these kinds of returns are feasible, which are not going to be feasible in an environment where the competition is more intense. And that's the point Ambassador just made. Now, it doesn't mean that in India there's not going to be any competition, because as soon as people saw Meru Cabs as being successful, then we had 4 other competitors come in with approximately the same business model. Fortunately, the market is big enough, for right now, for all these companies to be able to coexist. So, to quickly summarize, I think when we're looking at an emerging market like India, despite the complexities, we resolve the complexity issue by trying to get a partner, or going into joint venture. It could be private equity kind of arrangement. It could be joint venture. We should also be doing a market analysis to see what is the value proposition. And in areas like FMCG, fast food, F&B, the market is tremendous, and so there's money to be made. Of course, we have to take risks. If you're not sure what we're doing, we put in a toe in the water kind of strategy, whether we call it phased growth, or sometimes people call it the string of pearls strategy. If you're not sure, that's the way of developing your options. In terms of, we have to come up with a replicable solution, because unless we have the scalability, you're going to be stuck with small margins, and it's not going to pay off. And The opportunity for growth, in my opinion, is going to increase, but the biggest stumbling block are the policy issues that Ambassador referred to. And the government really needs to understand that investors are not only looking at risk, they're looking at return. I was flabbergasted when in the telecom case, the position was taken, oh, okay, this is getting too complex, we're going to make a decision next year. Making a decision next year wasn't any reprieve, and it certainly just propagated even more uncertainty as to what is going to happen. So what needs to be done on the Indian side really is looking at ways to mitigate risk and to mitigate these hurdles for getting business done. Because if your business model is that you're trying to get returns back in 5 years, and that gets pushed to 10 years, you need really, really patient capital. And the capital isn't that patient because capital just follows global opportunities. And the capital will go wherever the opportunity is. And we are seeing in the last couple of years, couple of months, that capital is moving out of India, and that is not good. So I'll save other things for Q&A, but thank you. And